Superintendent of the Fairport Central School District. To get things rolling this evening, I would like to introduce our Board of Education President, Mr. Peter Forsgren.
Thank you, Brett. Thank you, everyone, for coming out here tonight. On behalf of the Board of Education, I thank you. We are really grateful that you're here and wanted to do just quick introductions. I'm Peter Forsgren, the Board President, but we have here tonight Maureen Knupp, also from the Board, 21 years, I believe, right? Or almost 21 years on the Board. Marty Cardona and Kevin Glover. And others may come in throughout the night as well. So we're grateful for the opportunity to hear from you. I was reading today a message put out by the executive director of the Monroe County School Boards Association. She started her school board service back in 1997, so 22 years ago. She served for 18 years, and she talked a little bit about the changes in education in terms of the regulatory environment that has changed and really impacted us. And part of it, she noted that boards of education, what we do is truly grassroots, right? There's hardly any other government that's so community oriented in terms of what they do, because even our budgets are put out to the community to vote upon, and we don't have that anywhere else. So it's really grassroots. But over her term, she lamented somewhat of the changes that were being made at levels higher and higher away from where education is happening. And I can tell you, in working with our superintendent and the professional staff that we have in our school district, nobody knows the needs of our students better than what we do here in our community. Nobody knows it better. And it's awesome. And if you know your Board of Education, or if you don't, to tell you a little bit about it, we are constantly asking about what are the needs of our students, and all the students, not just generically. What about those who are learning English as a new language? And we have, I can't remember quite the number, 170 or so of those students in our community. We ask about those students who have special needs. We ask about what someone might call the middle of the road students, and those who are honors, and in sports and clubs. Do we have enough clubs? Are we giving enough purposes for students to be attracted and have a connection to their school, to love to be here? And we know they're going to love their breaks regardless, but to still love the time that they have here. But what do all those questions we ask have in common? Right? They have in common our facilities. Can you imagine? I mean, we're here tonight, right, 7 o'clock. Our facilities get used. 7,000 plus people tromping through here day in and day out between the staff and the students, and then games and sports activities. These are constantly being used. The wear and tear on them is great. And so we have to consider, you know, what is it we need to do to maintain them, to keep them going, and to get us adapted to how things have changed in terms of education and technology, et cetera, et cetera. So we have all of that. And so what brings us here tonight is kind of discussing our facilities. But it's more than that. A year and a half ago, we embarked on a path to create and have a long-term plan that matches our vision. In that endeavor, of which I imagine many of you were a part, and we are grateful for that participation, we learned about our strengths. We already knew it, but we got it on paper. Who we are, what we liked about ourselves, what was strong, and how are we going to keep it that way for years to come. We learned about our weaknesses. That's always a little hard to do, but introspective, it was really good for us. We learned about what we wanted to become as a community, because we involved, and Brett will get into some more of this, but you know, the thousands of people who responded to surveys. And then we learned about the threats that might keep us from becoming what we want to become, and how we build upon our strengths that we have. So we learned about all of that, and because we had that information, which was excellent information, we were able to put together a strategic plan, strategic initiatives, and say, okay, here's where we want to be and here's where we want to go, and we are making decisions along those lines. But some of those decisions have to be studied, and we've been studying for most of this school year, looking at our facilities generally, what is it that they need to be maintained. But we've also been considering, what brings most people here tonight, I imagine, the bringing of our 9th graders up to this school, whether we want to do that or not. As a board and in public workshops and other settings, we have looked at the financial impacts that it would have. Right? What will we need to do? What do we gain if we're able to potentially lease a building here and there? What do we possibly have to expend if we need to do that? But we set that aside and also ask the questions, as this, I've learned from these board members, will always do. They and we ask about the students. What is best for the students? Is it best to keep it the way it is? Or can we take the great things that we have being accomplished at Minerva DeLand, and can it still happen here? Or can it not? Will it be lost? So we've asked a lot of those questions. And we have the goal, we set the goal at the beginning of the school year to try and make an announcement sometime before or by the end of April, and we're still on that trajectory. So that brings us here tonight. If we make one decision, then it puts us on a path here, and there'll still be other decisions that have to be made after that relative to construction projects and what we do to maintain our facilities and bring them up to speed. If we make a different decision, it puts us on another path, but all of them have to do with facilities and what it is we need to do to keep them in good operating and working order for students yet to come. And so we're excited that you're here. We want to hear from you tonight, but we also want to give you some background information. So only for about another 10 more minutes, and then we will try and open it up for questions and have a dialogue, conversations, to hear comments, but give answers. I'm going to turn the time back over to our superintendent, Mr. Provenzano, to give some of the background information, and then we will open it up. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I'm on the clock 10 minutes. I think that was my cue. See what I can do. But we have incredible schools, and I stand in front of you. I'm humbled and honored to be part of such an incredible school community. I want to give you a little context so you could see where we're going. We hope that this will be interactive. We hope that you'll feel comfortable asking questions, and we hope that the slides that we presented will address some of your questions as well. We want to give you a context. I think, this didn't happen. We just didn't show up one day and say, hey, let's do this. When I became superintendent, this was one of the priorities that the board gave me, was to create a strategic plan, and these pieces came to fruition. We want to talk about the educational and fiscal implications of a potential merger. And I need to emphasize, we are an educational institution. We're proud to serve our children and do it in a way that we feel is good for our community, that is good for children, and that also represents our values and what's important to us. And of course, we have a fiscal responsibility to do that in a way that allows us to be sustainable into the future, and doing what's right for our taxpayers in Fairport. And we also understand how this decision, as Mr. Forsgren said, impacts our facilities. Last year we engaged in what was called the District Advisory Council. We had 107 members in our community, stakeholders from community members, business owners, to staff, and we even had a couple students involved to talk about their expectation, their dreams, and their vision for our school. Now, we had the U of R as a partner, and they were an incredible partner, and they were able to provide a lot of research-based approaches to gather information so we can understand what the community's needs and interests are. Now, what's fascinating about this, the U of R does this throughout New York State, and they were so impressed with the amount of pride, the amount of involvement that came from Fairport. We had over 3,000 people share their interest for our schools. 3,000 people touched the strategic initiatives, and that's what I'm proud of. So I could speak with confidence that when we're talking about facilities, when we're talking about educational programming or fiscal sustainability, I have a good pulse on what people are thinking, feeling, and wondering about our schools. Those strategic initiatives are incredibly important, and we'll be talking about those initiatives and how that led us here. But it was born through our District Advisory Council, a complete shared decision-making process, ushered and supported by the U of R. This whole idea of maximizing state building aid through project phasing. Whenever you're dealing with New York State SCD regulations, there's a whole lot of variables and algorithms to follow. And it's not as simple as, hey, let's just go build, or let's just go renovate, or let's just go take a group of students and put them here and move them over there. It's much more intricate than that. So what we're sharing with you tonight will be speaking to the maximizing our state aid, building aid, through what we're calling project phasing. There'll be multiple phases that we'll be talking about. It's just not going to happen overnight. This is a 5 to 6 year endeavor. Okay? There's going to be opportunities to get community input as we move along. What we're talking about is not going to happen next year. And I think that's so important to recognize. This is about being thoughtful, careful in our planning, making sure that we're completely understanding the educational, fiscal ramifications, so we can give our best to our students. And we need to minimize and manage impact on teaching and learning. Again, when you're talking about projects and phasing, you need to make sure that the learning and the high expectations of our students and our community continue to thrive. Our District Advisory Council, as I said, we had the opportunity to hear from many people, and we had over 3,000 participants. They voiced their expectations for the hopes and dreams of our schools. And they came up with these ideas of educational programming, fiscal sustainability, and facilities planning. So whatever strategic plan that we came forward, these were the things that we were focusing in on. We need to make sure that our students had opportunities. If you know Fairport, you know that we have elective programs for students. We have elective programs for artists. We have elective programs for those who have unique learning needs. We have an alternative education program that we're extremely proud of. We have business classes, engineering, computer science, art, music. These are a heartbeat of our school. And students, once they get to the high school, have an opportunity at all these wonderful experiences that just enhance them. We have co-curricular opportunities. Those are our clubs. We're proud of the dollars that we spend on clubs because it connects students to their environment. And by the way, you know, it's Brotherhood Sisterhood Week, and we had a high-profile student athlete talking about it wasn't the soccer championship that he remembers most, it's Brotherhood Sisterhood Week, right? That speaks to how we're touching students' lives and how we want them to be the best individuals, not just for each other, not just for the community, but for the world. Flexible learning spaces kept coming up. People say that we have great schools, but our learning environments need a little work. You know, it's not conducive to what we would call 21st century learning spaces. 21st century learning spaces, take a look. They're open. They're flexible. You're able to move furniture around, use different resources to support teaching and learning. I was in a class yesterday. It was an architectural class. At the end of the day, our technology vision team, we had a group of architecture students in Mr. Johnny Busani's architecture class talking about designing classroom space. And they were working in a larger classroom area off the library, and they were saying once we came into this larger space, the learning just changed. That was so important, and I just happened upon that. That was right from a student's mouth. The learning environment matters, and the District Advisory Council said that. We need to make sure that our spaces reflect that. And this idea of coherence, whether you go to JP, Martha Brown, Dudley, Northside, Brooks Hill, JA, there needs to be coherence in our programming. One group can't be getting one thing and another group not getting it, and so on and so forth. So these were the pieces that came forward with, within educational programming. Improved building safety. Safety and security is of utmost importance. This past year, we've been looking at all of our safety procedures and processes. We have the Monroe County Sheriffs and our local Fairport Village Police partnering in the name of the District Advisory Council carrying forth this initiative as we talk about building condition surveys and future planning, what type of safety needs to be input or installed or created in our buildings to meet this mandate. Technology was another priority. Professional development, making sure that our staff has the capacity to implement all the programming needs, the curricular needs, and so on. And of course, facilities, enhancing educational facilities for our district and doing it in a fiscally responsible way so we're sustainable. And this is what this one really gets me, because this is about the students who have yet to come to Fairport schools. We need to make sure that they have the opportunity to experience our schools in all its form, and we need to make sure that we position ourselves that allow us to continue to do incredible programming like Brotherhood Sisterhood Week, like the robust elective and co-curricular programming. Our students deserve that. Our community expects that. Here's some information that was shared from the perception report and the survey data that was shared from the District Advisory Council. This is what community members said. There was overwhelming consensus that Fairport schools were well maintained but dated. There was not a commitment to collaboration in building design. There was little emphasis on technology and STEM education. One respondent told us that for decades, Fairport has emphasized the educational program at the expense of facility maintenance and updating. The most common responses were to leave the configuration as it is and move the 9th grade to the high school. Community members, stakeholders said that. Educational programming remains the priority, and it should be the priority. 98% respondents says it should be the priority. 97 said safety. Who's going to argue with that? Technology should be at the forefront. You know, we all go home, we all live in a world where technology's around us. We need to make sure that our students have access to it and students understand how to interact with it in a constructive, meaningful way. Professional development, again, there it is, making sure that our staff has the tools to be able to implement the good teaching and learning that needs to occur. And there's facilities. It keeps popping up, making sure that we maintain and protect our investments. 92% it's important to upgrade. 92% of the respondents said it's important to upgrade. 54% said reduce the buildings so you can become more efficient. So you can continue to look for ways to maximize efficiencies and use efficiencies to offset debt or to impact the tax rate. People said if you improve your facilities, you're going to get a better reputation. So if families are coming and they're looking at our neighboring school districts, and they're fine neighboring school districts, if you look at one community, they might have newer schools. If you look at Fairport, if we have newer schools, something to be proud of. This would give people the opportunity to see that we take pride in our facilities and would improve our reputation. And thereby, our strategic initiatives were created last year. I believe it was in May. And I'm really proud of the fact that we've been working these strategic initiatives this past year. If you take a look, I won't read through them all, but this was about facilities planning. The first initiative was improving building safety requirements. And we're working that through our District Advisory Council. When you take a look at our building condition survey, it audits the health and safety things that we need to focus in on to make sure that our students have and our staff have safe facilities, inviting facilities. Create a multi-year to meet the essential building improvements identified in the mandated building condition survey. Again, that's having a plan. You know, for some reason, you know, previous years, that plan has not been publicized. We are in a place where we are publicizing it. We are putting it into our budget. It's part of our strategic initiative, and I'm really proud of the work that we've done with it to date. And you're going to be hearing about that as we go through our plans. Complete a cost-benefit analysis of combining Minerva DeLand and Fairport High School. Right? That's why we're here. That's what the Board of Education has been studying, the educational benefits and the fiscal benefits, which we'll be really highlighting in a bit. If appropriate, identify and pursue building renovations associated with a reorganization plan. It's important that you recognize that one doesn't happen without the other. It is a 5 to 6 year process. We need to make sure that our buildings are going to be able to absorb the students. The facilities are being used in a completely different way, which we'll be talking about in a little bit. And I'll emphasize that when I get to the next slide. But this slide is very important. We have stabilized with our enrollment, and that's good news. We've just recently received an updated forecast from statistical forecasting, and we're going to be where we are, all right? And we're not going to go below the 5,600 mark given our projections. There were some early projections that we had that were done in 10-year intervals that said we were going to go to 5,300. Well, we were able to look at that closely. We measured twice, and we're about 5,628 today. And in about 5 years, we'll be at 5,623. That's a delta of 5. And I think, you know, that shows that we're stable. And that helps us with future planning and understanding where our pockets of students are going to be. And that provides a lot of I think, ease throughout our school community. And if you take a look, it's a way to really look at this is, 1920, we're going to have about 480 students if you add 468 and 22. If you take a look at the incoming K, we're bringing in about 400. Okay, and we've had anywhere between 5 and 550, right? So our incoming classes are much lower. And so that's where you start seeing the declining enrollment. Now, we have a live birth ratio, and that pretty much means students will leave Fairport, but students will also come into Fairport, and you'll see the diagonal lines project for that, right? They grow a little bit throughout time. So these projections build in some of that, the transition that occurs each year. But that's good news, okay? When we're trying to future plan. Our graduating classes will be between 415 and 440, right? And again, we were living in the 5s. Some of you who went to Fairport High School, you got to the 6s, right? You got to the 6s. So quite a bit decline in our population, but we're still a big school, and we still serve and have high expectations. This is a powerful visual from my perspective. Past enrollments between 2005 and 2006 to 2009 and 2010, that's when we have our current configuration. We have 10, 11, 12, 3 grade levels. Right? Our numbers are 1804 and 2007, 2008. The blue line, that's our peak. If you take a look at projected enrollments between 2019 and 2024, you'll see that's 9, 10, 11, and 12. That's 4 grades. We're able to not match what we had between 2005 and 2010. So the building's going to be able to manage and maintain the number of students coming in. And given our enrollments, we could see that there's some predictability around that. So we're not going to be building any tracks anytime soon. That's just how Parrington is at this point in time. And that's not a bad thing, but that helps us with our projections. This piece right here, I think, is important to recognize. Well, people say, well, since you had the ability to bring kids in 2005 and 2010, and the numbers are going to be actually a little bit lower, why do we need to talk about renovating? Okay, it goes back to this idea of 21st century learning spaces. It's the idea of the way that we went to school in the 70s, 80s, and even in the 90s. School has changed. The environments have changed. But it's not only that. You take a look at this map, right? The orange, there's 4 rooms there that are now dedicated to safety and security. It's the new main office, right? You take a look at what's occurred with our commitment to our English language learners and our commitment to provide support to students. There's 2 classrooms that have been used, taken out of circulation or added to the mix, if you will. Another one in the orange is off the library, which is a professional development center. It's part of the district offices being in this area. Now, we would use these areas if we had access to them, but the main office is there, right? We need to be able to make some adaptations. Here's another slide that speaks to 10 special ed classrooms. Now, special ed programming has increased over the years. We have more programming. The rooms are solely dedicated for special education, so we don't have flexibility to get other classes in there. Another reason why we need to find more space to efficiently bring students in. We need to be responsive to our building condition survey that speaks to our 1970 science classrooms, or the tech edition, or the tech wing that is the same tech wing that they're using in 1970. They're using it today. There's a makeshift lift in there, and code requirements have completely changed. So those are the reasons that we're saying that, yeah, we could bring them over, but we're going to be needing to do some modernizing and updating in our facilities. Educational impact was something that we focused in on significantly. expanded opportunities. The board spent a lot of time talking about, if students come over from 9th grade to 10th grade, 11th and 12th grade building, will they still have the same opportunities? Will they have more opportunities? Will they have more access to clubs? Will they have more opportunities to electives? Questions that they're considering as part of this. Transitions. If you're a student at Northside, you could have 5 transitions through our schools. It's important to recognize that, best practice would be to minimize transitions, especially in years where students need to be, nurtured. You need to make sure that, you have opportunities to build relationships, and those transitions are extremely important. Coherence, making sure that, again, teachers talking to teachers, teachers talking about learning and students. When you're on the same site, does that enhance opportunities? Does that enhance student success? This idea of aligning start times to research. The Board of Education is extremely interested to continue this conversation, and that was part of the educational impact in looking at opportunities to keep that idea alive as we move along here in our future planning initiatives. And continue to use Minerva DeLand as an asset. There's athletic fields there, there's gyms, there's pools, the auditorium is frequently used. So that was another component of our conversation. And if we continue to do projects into the future, Minerva DeLand could serve as a viable swing space option. Mr. Stevens is going to come up. Matt Stevens, our Assistant Superintendent for Business, will be coming up to talk about the fiscal impact.
Thank you, Mr. Provenzano, and good evening, everybody. On the other side of the slide, you see the fiscal impact. So these are projections based on, assuming that students are out of Minerva DeLand, moved over to the high school, and the district will be able to recognize some staffing efficiencies. So you see a projection up there of approximately 321,000. Also, you see operating and transportation efficiencies. So related to transportation, a key piece to remember here is we are aided on transportation, so it's about 70 cents on the dollar. So that has to be factored into any efficiencies there that the district's able to recognize. And then some estimated revenue in leasing out Minerva DeLand to public or governmental entity. It's key in that piece because that's with tax-exempt debt on buildings, it plays an important role in terms of who districts can lease out building space to. So those are the projected efficiencies overall in terms of transitioning over. Now there's another piece to it too when we talk about, well, what if there's vacant buildings across the district for administrative buildings? And that'd be related to potentially Balmer Place, district office, other district property, for example. Those would offer opportunities for one-time revenues. Does have to be, there's rules and regs regarding that, so that money any sale would have to be placed into a reserve for debt service, have to go towards the outstanding debt on those buildings. But those would be one-time opportunities for revenue the district could take advantage of as well in terms of the efficiencies overall. So those are the basic pieces there in terms of efficiencies.
Managing properties.
Managing properties. Again, that's regarding the current properties we have, as I mentioned before, Balmer and district office. Whitebrook, for example, is another piece of district property, all under evaluation through this process. Is there anything else you want me to touch on here?
I would offer, if there's questions, I would welcome you, if you have any questions about, we just sort of went through that, it went beyond like 10 minutes, I'm sorry. But if there's specific questions, we'd be happy to address them as best as we can. Is that per year?
Per year. So there's an important piece of that in terms of management of any savings. So it could offer a budgetary savings, also could offer the opportunity for the district to look into offsetting future capital work. So either way, it does have an impact in terms on the tax piece. So it's, again, general fund or capital, two different options in terms of managing those figures. So.
Well, people can occupy it. I mean, there's work that needs to be done on it, and that's part of the work. That's part of the question of, using our reserves to offset capital projects. Because if students aren't in there, and if there are students in there, that changes the aid ratio as well. So it's not a yes or no exact question. It's a depends.
Yeah, it depends.
We have to maintain it.
Yeah, no, I was going to say it depends on the use of the facility, yeah, and what the needs of any you know, in any group leasing the building would need.
It's early. It's early. I do think that people have mentioned it in passing, but the board hasn't even made a decision yet. So,
And my thought, because of where we are in terms of having made a final decision, we've asked, this has to be extremely conservative, right? If we make that decision, you can bet that the Board of Ed would give some task to the superintendent and his team to say, you got to do a better job than 70,000 in leasing, right? Once we have this facility, it's a great, good-sized building. But right now, we're being conservative, right? So that we're looking and making decisions on many different factors, but we need to be conservative on the finances because it's just so early. We won't know what the interest is if this is 3 or 4 years down the road.
I do think that yes, the expectation is that, how are we going to use that? Is it going to be to directly impact our tax rate, or indirectly through putting it into a capital reserve to continue to protect our investments? And we talked about the facilities maintenance process that we're engaged in, and so those are decisions that the board will have to make. But absolutely, it's about that piece right there. But the most important piece is right here. Right, it's the educational impact, and I'm proud of the fact that the board has spent a lot of time talking about, this is about student opportunities. If we can't give students the same opportunities, or if we're going to negatively affect those opportunities, I don't think they want any part of that conversation. This idea of making sure that there's alignment throughout our school community, the 912 community, that was something that was so important that came up through our district advisory process. And that's where they've been spending a lot of their time. And the options that we're going to be talking about allow for further aligning start times, which we can get to in a second. But any other questions? There was something? Yes?
Based on the fact that there are still pieces of the land that you want to use, like the fields and the gym and the pool, has the district ever considered moving Joanna Perrin or Martha Brown into the Minerva Domain space and then leasing the other building?
So if you take a look at this piece right here, that would come next, a complete cost-benefit analysis of alternative proposals for middle school 6 through 8 housing, right? So firstly, the board wants to understand what's the cost-benefit of doing that. But we have, started to do some simple math on that. It would require, just as a cursory, significant renovations to Minerva DeLand, and in addition, because of the student population and the number of programs that are in Johanna Perrin. So this idea of feasibility comes into play. So we're going to continue to look at it, but I'm just thinking, we've been thinking ahead because we know that we got to tackle that. Yes?
Your future enrollment projections were over a 5-year period. To me, it seems a little bit short. What about years 6 through 10?
That's what I said, right? And the people in the industry, they're really resident to give you a 6 through 10. Those cohorts are hard to predict. I was able to squeeze an unofficial out of him, and that's where the 415 and 440 comes from. He feels fairly confident, and again, he would not put his name next to it and sign it, because once you get from 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, it becomes a little bit less predictable, with variability. But he did say with certain levels of confidence that again, we don't have any housing tracks coming up. The rate at which people move in and out, he felt like these numbers were going to hold true. But that's why you keep a building too. Same expectations. When you talk about programming, the Board of Education has expectations for class sizes, and not increasing them, keeping them at the rate at the secondary level, 24 to 26. And there are special programs, technology classes, art classes, capstone classes where those numbers are lower. So that hasn't changed at all. That's correct. In our projections, we went with our class sizes that we currently have. Yes?
My questions come from my kids. I have one here and one in JP. My senior is concerned about class size because her class went up from 20 to 30, and there isn't even enough places to put the kids currently in her classrooms. And she's in AP classes. orchestra and how it's kind of ninth grade orchestra combined with middle school orchestras. And she's also concerned about the cafeteria. You have 3 cafeterias here, 1 for each grade level. So where would the 4th grade level go?
Yeah, there's a lot there. Good question. She's very thoughtful. If you take a look at our enrollment, it's stabilizing, and as we continue to do projections, those class sizes will naturally stabilize. Again, our goal is to be between 24 and 26. That's an average. That doesn't mean there's going to be times, and it's always been this way. There's been class sizes of 28, 29 in some of those classes. That happens in whenever you're doing master schedule, you can't get it dead on. If you take a look at the plans that will be coming up, we'll be able to address what that cafeteria will we're aspiring it to be, and how we hope to answer that question. As far as the electives, and being part of the 9th grade band and all those pieces, we anticipate that will still be an opportunity. I know that there was this thought of the 9th grade play is a big opportunity for kids. That doesn't mean we can't have a 9th grade play, right? We will respect them where they are. And those things won't be wavered. I don't know. I will address your cafeteria one. Was there another one that you?
Well, my 12th grader just doesn't see where there's enough space in this building.
And the locker piece, I'm not sure where we are with lockers. I think that there's lots of so kids don't use fair enough. Well, I'm with you. Okay. Yes.
Appreciate the time you guys put into preparing this and the invite. It's hard to argue against the idea of renovation and upgrade and technology in this day and age. Keeping pace is difficult. What I wonder, and this is coming from a high school principal, 9-12 presents some different challenges when you consider kind of the social and emotional, the developmental stage of a 9th grader compared to a 10th, 11th, or 12th grader. I spend about 85% of my day focused on resources towards our freshmen in my school. Is it too early to begin to work with staff to ready them for that developmental difference? Take, for example, maybe how you're going to approach grading. So what does that time frame look like? How is that been addressed in the strategic plan?
Well, again, the board still needs to make the decision. If the board chooses to go forward with a merger by the end of April, those are the pieces that we need to continue to build upon. Like, for example, professional development. The type of transitions that will occur between 8 and 9, the capacity that needs to be developed from a professional development standpoint, that needs to be the priority. So I think it's, first we're trying to figure out the what, and then, when we decide to, when the board decides, then we'll understand how it's going to happen, because it needs to be different, right? That's a fact. Like, 9th graders are not seniors, and it needs to be done, very thoughtfully. And we've talked about some different ideas offline about what that can look like. How do you create a different environment for the 9th graders coming in, and the staff that's working with them as well definitely needs to understand. In our staffs, and just like your staff is, they're professionals and they're wanting to do the best for our children. So, yes.
I just have a couple of facility questions that I'm unclear about. So you mentioned that we want to keep the gym, the pool, and the auditorium, and there were rules and regulations about how that space can be used. So what do you foresee, or who do you foresee as being the person that will use that space? Or can you give an example of how that space might be used,
For example, our students still use the pool, right? So that will be a part of after-school activities. There's still basketball teams and lacrosse teams and baseball teams. Those are alive and well. And it depends on who's leasing the building as well. If there's a BOCES program out there, they need PE space, they use gym space. The auditoriums are used frequently. You drive by our district and it's jammed with cars, and we're proud of that. So there's pieces to that facility that our middle schools use, that our elementary schools use. But it depends on who's renting it and what they're renting it for, right? And we can only rent to public or governmental agencies. And truthfully, we haven't canvassed it. I haven't, met with anybody offline to come up. It's just waiting for the board to make the decision, and then from there, I think like Mr. Forsgren said, the expectation is let's start finding some partnerships that are good for our community, that still allow us to use them, because we still have, we have FAST still uses the pool. It's still a viable resource. It's summer still. We got camps going on, so we still need to maintain. So way back when, there was the potential to build a new elementary school. That never came to fruition, but we bought the land. I believe it was, I'm not sure how many years ago it was.
2001.
Say it?
2000.
19 years ago, right? Someone said from the 2001. 2001. So that property has been sitting there. Now there's certain stipulations as to how and who we could sell it to, right? So that's the next part of the conversation. Yep. Yes. And I'll come back this way. Yeah.
I had a question similar to the social emotional needs. Has that been considered or researched at all, and how it would impact the difference between having ninth graders separated versus?
I mean, the research is all. Yeah. I mean, it's the most important conversation, and if you know anything about our administrators and our Board of Education, that's the #1 priority, is making sure that we can support, nurture, and sustain the right environments that promote the social emotional well-being. And we feel like, with a coherent program, and we talk about our positive behavior intervention support program that's underway, and it's in its third year. As students cycle up, expectations, modeling, it needs to be our #1 priority. As how you bring students in, how you transition them in. There's different ways to do that. I wouldn't expect them just to show up and say, hey, we're here. There's lots of work that needs to occur beforehand. There's things that we could do before school starts, with orientations and so on and so forth, to bring them in slowly, making sure that professionals are communicating with each other so we know students' strengths and where we need to continue to help them grow. But it's the most important part of this conversation. I think what's better for them is this, intentionality. And making sure, the research would say is to make sure that you have a plan to support ninth graders, knowing that it's such an important year, just like the middle school years. There's a system and process to support them. There's a system and process and best practice to support freshmen coming in, and having resources at their disposal, having program that's intentionally aligned to support their social emotional needs. That's where we want to be. And I can't tell you here it is, because but I do know that it's wrapped up in our positive behavior intervention support system. It's wrapped up in how we transition right now between 9, 10. It would be 8, 9. I want to look over here and then I'll come back to the middle pack. Yes. Maybe, right? And again, it's 5 to 6 years out, right? So I can't project that, but that's part of the conversation. Are there redundancies? Staff still needs to teach, right? So it's part of the equation of is it absorbed through retirements, or are there just natural efficiencies that occur when you merge, and if there's transition overlap with the transition?
The reason I said piggyback is kind of the SEL, with that being the hot topic in schools these days, to decrease staff but increase students into a building. I just wonder if, like she was talking about, allowing enough staff to be there for that transition, and
What's that? Yeah, I mean, it's exactly. Yeah, but I can't say, yeah, we're not going to, well, the ratios need to be appropriate. You know, you just can't take students, say there's 430 of them, you know, there's, you know, an expectation in ratio that we have, that we've all come to expect, that we would transition with them, I would imagine. So we're not automatically going to say, you know, no more counselors. Right. Yes.
I don't mean to be separated on this, but so from the research that was done, from health, the mental health of the children, what's best for them mentally, physically, emotionally, and educationally, was there consideration for sixth graders to be pushed back down? And then the middle schools and stuff as they come up?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the research is on that. You know, I know the middle school. Yeah, again, from a feasibility standpoint, about what that would take from getting our facilities ready for sixth grade, you know, and then having ninth grade pushed back to our middle schools. We didn't study that because of feasibility purposes, and the research doesn't speak to pushing kids back or making K-6 buildings. It does talk about transitions and making sure that you have the right pieces in place to support students from social emotional perspective. And we feel that, you know, the 6-8 model that we have right now is working well, right? K-5 as well. We do feel that we needed to reflect on the 9-12 piece. Okay.
I have 2 points. One question first. I'm sure it's been discussed, but I'd like to kind of clarify. You have the Ballmer building, you have the district office, you have Minerva being presumably open. Any comments or any plans to consolidate all of those administration and special needs into Minerva? And along with that, is there, if you leased the building, would you still get state aid if there aren't students in?
I should take that one first.
If you took over Minerva and put the special ed, I guess special ed is still at Ballmer, I don't know when the old days it was, district office, bring your administration offices to Minerva, and then sell the parcel in the village, 2 parcels.
Yeah, so we've had conversations with SED Facilities Planning in terms of aidability. Administrative buildings overall don't receive the state building aid. So for example, DO, Ballmer Place, any construction work is non-aidable work at those buildings. E-buildings or instructional buildings receive the building aid. So current building aid flowing in on Minerva DeLand would continue to flow as long as the district owned it, even with moving over the administrative, but any future work, if declared an administrative building, would not receive the state building aid. Hopefully that answers the question in that piece. Yep, it's a good question.
But if you take a look at this bullet right here, it speaks to that question of repurposing existing administrative offices, and that's once we figure out what's happening to Minerva DeLand and FHS, we will then be able to, within the next several years, to start having conversation and actually make movement on those other pieces of Ballmer Place and District Office and the Whitebrook.
Okay, and just a comment that you wanted to make, because I'm sitting here sort of chuckling inside. I was on the board at the time, on the school board, at the time that Minerva became a 9th grade only building, and holy hell broke loose when that happened. We were going to bring the 10th graders all together at the high school, and it was like horrendous reaction. And the idea is to keep 9-12 as that's back when I was around, that was the ideal setup. However, Fairport's gotten very used to having the 9th grade only building. The 9th graders have done a really nice job of blending as a class and becoming close with the teachers. So it's just kind of what goes around comes around.
Yeah.
So anyway, congratulations. Thank you for involving the community so thoroughly in this discussion.
Thanks.
as a current board member, I appreciate your comments. One, we just, every month we go to a building and spend several hours. And so we were at the high school and one-on-one had a personal guide, senior, and asked a question about that. And initial reaction was some of the things you said. We come together, we blend. By the end of our couple hours, without asking again, I hadn't asked, he had turned around and then brought other reasons as to why to blend them. It was interesting to watch a student go through the process that we had already been going through as well and asking the same types of questions. The benefits here, the downside there, and how do we try and maintain the benefits and mitigate the downside, right? So we're definitely asking those questions, but it's fun to ask a student that as well and to see your perspective. Thanks for sharing that.
Yes.
I'm unclear on what the primary benefit would be. Is it just saving about $500,000 a year? Or is it the facilities, is it only having to upgrade the facilities in one building versus two?
Yeah, from an educational perspective, and again, I think that's where our priorities lie. We'll provide opportunities for students. Will they be able to experience the elective programs, the co-curricular programs, some of the special service programs? Right now, the alternative ed is split. It's at the high school. There'll be continuity in those services. Can we do some of that better and more cleaner? I mean, that is high school credit. So, sometimes when you get to 9th to 10th grade, and if students are struggling, could we do that better if there wasn't that transition? Those are the questions that we're grappling with.
This isn't even really budgetary, this is more kind of student.
Again, it has to be about the students. That's our number one priority. To me, this is gravy. This is an expectation, and this is good for our Fairport community, and I'm proud to serve this. But I want to make sure, and I think this speaks to these ideas of the social emotional learning. That's where we live, and that's what we will not compromise. And we need to make sure that that if this does occur, that the right supports and systems are in place to develop, nurture, and sustain the right environment for those freshmen, because it is an important year. We know that their first year sets the track for their success in later years in high school, and that can't be compromised. And that's the question that we're pondering. Yes.
From my daughter who's a senior and my two nieces who are in middle school, their initial reaction is negative to the idea of the whole thing. I grew up in K through 6, 7 through 9, 10 through 12. Seemed to work fine in Webster. I was going to echo the person over there that said that as well. I'm surprised that wasn't considered as a model that exists. And I think that you're going to have to sell it to the students. Yeah, parents may pay the bills, but you're going to have to sell it to the students who may initially not react positively.
Yeah. Making sure that we're meeting their needs. I mean, they are who we serve, and if the board does make that decision to do a merger, it would be because we feel like we can give them an enhanced opportunity.
That's actually a really good point, because my 7th grader has a lot of anxiety. She thinks it's closing before she gets there. Have you guys thought of asking the kids what they thought?
I speak to the kids frequently, and it's a mixed bag, and it depends on the child, and I'm sure all of you have at your dinner tables have had different conversations about it too. So I can't say that this is where they all end up. It depends on who they are, right? But from a programming standpoint, if I feel confident that we could support them and make sure that they don't skip a beat as far as the amount of opportunities that they have and the amount of service that they receive, I think that's something that we're considering. Yes?
So to that point of 7th graders being worried that the door is going to close before they get there, can we have this in a future slide? You mentioned a 5 to 6 year plan. What does that look like?
Yeah.
Are you saying in 5 years the door could potentially close if the board says yes?
So I do have that in a potential slide, and it speaks to the amount of work and phasing and construction that needs to occur, because that does not occur. We just can't bring students in here. There's lots of preparation that needs to occur. There's lots of updating to our facilities that need to occur. And like I said, we're still working with the same science classrooms. You know, yeah, right. Yep. And the same automotive tech lab. We still want to offer automotive. We think it's a great elective, but you know, the facility's tired. You've been into the gymnasium. There's lots of, you know, pieces, mechanical pieces, and electrical pieces. Our boilers need updating. To do the science classrooms, which you'll see, it's going to take possibly 2 to 3, definitely 2, possibly 3 summers to get at that work. The cafeteria that you'll see, that's going to address some of the questions about the space, that's going to be a multiple. That's going to be over a course of several months, but the kids still need to eat, so there's going to need swing space. So we're going to be getting to that in a second. Yes?
Can you help me draw the line between our facilities are out of date and we have to move the 9th grade into the building? Like, they seem like 2 totally different things that we can make connections to if we want, but don't need to be coupled together?
All right, I'll jump slides here. If you take a look at our expectations and our needs in Fairport High School, okay? There are 1970 science classrooms that are outdated, that do not meet code and standards, right? There are, again, the tech lab is still the same tech lab that they had when it was built in 1970. The cafeteria is highly inefficient as far as supervising, managing students for safety and security. So this needs to occur no matter what happens, right? So this is the team rooms. Is everyone familiar with the team rooms are? That's where athletic teams come. That's where the lacrosse team goes, the soccer team goes, the football team goes to store all their equipment. Visiting teams will come in. You know, that's where they'll come in, you know, before they participate. There needs to be some work done. The lockers are rusty. Kids, you know, sometimes get caught and cut on, you know, some of the sharp edges. So there's things that, from a code violation, that we need to maintain. Our mechanical system needs to be updated. It's using 1990 or 19. What's that? 2000 technology, right? It's 2020 now. It's digital, right? And we need to make sure that, you know, operating more efficiently. So there's all that work that needs to occur, and that has nothing to do with bringing anybody over. It has nothing to do with it bringing anybody over. And here's a picture of the science labs that need to be renovated. Okay, and the space needs to be used differently. This needs to happen regardless of a potential merger to just to achieve. You know, some of those basics, okay? So then there's going to be some time that needs to lapse, and you'll see this is phase 1 is what we just experienced. Phase 2 would be a possible technology bump, all right? This would give more space and flexible spaces for our technology, people who use or participate in technology. Our NASA Hunch program students will be able to participate in programming here. Our DDP, our architecture classes will be able to have these flexible spaces. We'll be able to take this area, which is the front of the room. This will be a new fitness area, which is highly used by all of our students. We will be able to put supervision in the back corner of the building with our athletic director office. This part is extremely vulnerable right now. So we feel like these renovations will prep our for students to come to the 9th grade. This is the library. We need to get classroom space available and back, because the earlier slide that I showed you talked about, you know, we've used 4 classrooms for safety and security. So those 4 classrooms need to be brought back. We have 10 classrooms that are dedicated solely to special ed. Those and those need to be brought back, and this is our attempt to recapture those spaces. So this happens in 2022. So between 2019 and 2022, we'll be bringing this to the forefront. So I guess my answer to your question is, it's not the same high school, right? We've lost space, we're trying to recapture space. So just because we've had as many kids in here, the space is being used completely different. Yes?
On the fiscal slide, you had staffing efficiencies or whatever. So do you have a projection on the impact it'll have on staff?
Head count, I don't have an exact head count. It's just based upon, some of the support staff that transitions over, and a very general estimate on some of the redundancies. I don't have names, I don't have specific disciplines. We won't be able to do that until we actually have the schedule to be run.
Yeah, and I think it's important to think about that that's also out several years, so it can be managed and looked at, throughout the process as it would get closer, if that were the direction to head in, to try to manage any attrition or any of those pieces overall. So.
As I look at the fiscal impact, am I correct in thinking that the 420,000 approximate, you aren't going to realize that until you're out in year 4 or 5 anyway, since all this is going to be
Correct.
That's not an annual saving.
It would be realized until actually out of the building, right, and transitioned over, if that were the case. And, annually, like it would be a long term, right? If it were recognized in the budget, it would be, year 2, and then it sticks as a lower expense in some of those areas overall. So it wouldn't be an annual drop of 400 each year, but that 400 would stay off overall, if that helps. Makes sense.
Discuss about safety throughout the district. Changes or anything, any decisions that have been made?
The safety audit will be concluded in May, okay? But if you take a look at the BCS and, the work that needs to occur in the first phase of this, it's going to address safety and security. If you take a look at what we're doing in this year's budget with, putting dollars towards cameras to increase security. We have the Smart Schools Bond Act where we're looking at, different ways to spend that on security. We know that from the security audit, it was using the key fobs to get into classrooms. We feel that, that's on a faster pace than waiting for a project. But when we do get to a project, that's when you will look at the vestibules. If you look at the high school's vestibule, that's the model where there's 2 secure entrances. I think that's the standard that the district's going to be going to, and you'll be seeing that in a future capital project if the board elects to do that.
Understand that it's actually about 5 years or so before the actual transition of students from Minerva to here happen, or is that going to happen earlier?
It won't happen earlier. And again, I'm on the 5 to 6 plus years. And again, that depends on the scope of work. That depends on when projects are passed by the, or voted upon by the community. And that's just my way of saying that it won't be that 7th grade student. It won't be that 6th grade student. We're looking into primary years, second grade. Yep. Yes.
We saw the renovation, projected renovations and so on that need to be done prior to any new population. And you're concerned about repurposing lost classrooms, bringing them back. Are you actually going to have enough classrooms to accommodate new 400 students plus without building expansion?
We believe so. We believe, and that was the purpose of this graph right here, right, to show that we don't think the numbers are going to skyrocket and put us in any position to where we underestimated. We feel that the enrollment is at a place where it's stabilized, that it gives us that predictability that we need. Yes.
So I do have a 2nd grader and I also have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, so I'm kind of thinking long term.
Yeah.
What if enrollment does happen to rise substantially by the time that 2-year-old
Well, that's the purpose. And you know, this is what districts do. You know, every so often, and those who, I think Pat May was saying, you know, Minerva DeLand was something else at one point. I'm not sure when the exact year that it became just a 9th grade building, but it hasn't been looked at since. And I think, you know, that's why you do hold on to these properties like Minerva DeLand. And when you have more students in a building, if we do all of a sudden get skyrocketed, you know, enrollment, and by the way, we'll be able to tell that by how we're monitoring our classes and enrollments. You know, we can prepare for that. And there's different state aid benefits to that as well with more students.
It was about 89.
Thank you.
I was the last 9th and 10th class member.
Come on down. No, I'm sure. Yes. Then I'm going to jump over. Yes.
The slide that had the fiscal stuff on it, on the left there were more bullets, and on the fourth one down, you discussed the start times and the research behind that. I know that Webster has decided next year that they're going to flip-flop their elementary and high school. Regardless of whether the board decides to go with this merger or not, is that something that we plan as a district to move forward in thinking?
It's something we desperately want to do because the research is positive. At the same time, looking at the financial impact of what we had studied, it was challenging, so that's when we decided that we do it here. Our best bet really is part of the merger because you see the transportation efficiency. We would need, I think it was 7 to 8 buses. Right now we can say, no, we don't have to do that. So it allows us to absorb it and do it that way and align them together. Yeah, I'd love to have been ahead of Webster, but overall I think for our community to add that much expense to our budget just for buses, it was a difficult pill to swallow. So we opted to push it out, make it part of this, make it more holistic approach, if you will, about our facilities and then the transportation associated with it and everything.
Yes.
Has there been discussions as this proceeds and the construction and so forth starts to impact this building here? Has there been discussion with regards to the current student body and how that's going to impact those years 22, 23, and the life experience of those high school students in this building?
Yeah, so that was the very first slide that I had, is this whole idea of minimize the impact, manage the impact on teaching and learning, because their students will still be in the school. And I think that's where our construction manager, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but you know, that's where he comes into play. And we talk about, you know, it takes 3 years to get science classrooms renovated. Where are they going to eat? Well, maybe we're eating in different spaces in the building. You know, but the learning can't be compromised, right? And you get one time to be a 10th grader or 11th grader, and you know, or a senior, all the above. And you know, I'm with you. I have children going through the pipeline too, and you know, we want to make sure that. But that's why we have you know good partners who understand how do you manage the swing space for short periods of time. That's it could be disruptive. Now, we did look at an option. Truthfully, we did look at an option. It was going to cost us, it was a $35 million addition on the back of the building. It would have given us what we needed. It would have taken care of our building condition survey. It wouldn't have been as much of a disruption, but it was too much of an impact on the taxpayer. We were not getting our building aid ratios that were beneficial to our taxpayers. So that's why that would not be one that I would recommend, because it would just cost too much. And unfortunately, we got to manage that piece because we have a responsibility to that. But this does come with that. Mr. Dunn.
A few months ago, we had a guest speaker, I can't remember Dr. So-and-so.
Dillon. Yep. Robert Dillon. He's coming. Yep.
Panel.
Yep.
And he was supposed to be the expert, and we brought him in. One of his greatest recommendations, my takeaway from that, was that outdoor space for children. I don't hear anything about outdoors other than gym.
I mean, as far as our programming and being outside and nature. Yeah.
Recycling, alternative energies. I don't see any of that on the plans for solar or geothermal.
Yeah, that's so when we get into our user groups and we take a look at the what and the how, that's when we would cost all that into the project. The board would have to make a decision as to how far and to what extent. I know that Mr. Buffum, who would be here, he'd be high-fiving you because, that's what he would say to maximize efficiency, get students involved. But what we do have here, and I'm going to use this as a segue, is that we have learning spaces here that we can talk about open spaces here for another LGI just off the cafeteria. We have a cafeteria here that allows for sight lines, so when you're supervising students, you can see the entire cafeteria, and you could bring in multiple grade levels. You have opportunities for a robotics team to use this after school. Right now, our robotics team is housed at Martha Brown. They're excellent hosts, but that's an inconvenience where it's stored and where they're located. They're high school students. You have our NASA Hunch team who will have a open, flexible space where they can, engage in their multidisciplinary project. We have these spaces that we're creating throughout our school that are going to that would be in the name of Dr. Dillon. Now, again, these spaces can be reimagined by our user groups. This is not concrete. If you take a look at our library, this is just a concept. This is not how it's going to be. The way I work, and for the good or bad of it, I bring lots of people around me, and I want to hear what they have to say. So I know our librarians have a lot to say about the learning environment, and we want to make sure that we're using the space to maximize it to the best of how they envision it. But it needs to be in this collaborative area that we're trying to create in our schools. And it just won't be at the high school. Yes.
A little bump out for the tech and the robotics and the NASA Hunt. It almost looks foolish. If you're going to expand the footprint, why wouldn't you just blast that out, put the new science rooms there, convert the upstairs science old rooms into classrooms, leave the library alone, and have this nice science technology wing built like Google would have done.
So
And then we might be able to bring some of the 430 students that are bused out of the district to go to other schools, and it might bring back to our community.
maximize state aid, right? It would just, at this point, with the amount of debt that we currently have, it's just not lining up, and it's not feasible. It was looked at. It's something that, again, we thought that it would be the cleanest way to go, but it's just not a feasible way to go. And I don't think I could not present that in good faith to the board, and I don't think the community would appreciate that if I didn't keep that in mind, the finances of it. Questions? Yes?
So Brett, you're open to suggestions and ideas. How does this audience get those to you and the board to consider those things over the next 5 to 6 years if we do want to have more of a Google space and a lot for finances to be managed differently and such?
Yeah, that's just part of our process. There'll be more community forums. We'll be sharing information as to what we're dreaming. But the first order of business is that the board needs to make a decision. And as we do capital projects, we'll be sharing phasing, what's going into it, community be aware of it, so you'll have, that's how you'll have an opportunity to get at it, right? We have experts inside. We'll be, working with our teachers and staff members who use it as we move along. I would stay tuned to our board meetings and, updates, because that's when we'll be talking about it, and that's how you get the information. Yes?
All right, I'm sorry, I'm still struggling with the math, right? So first of all, I like the idea of putting the next grade in the building, so this isn't necessarily against that. But what I heard you say is that the building has enough space as it is now for 9th grade. And what I also heard you say is, and our facilities are out of date and we need to make changes. And I heard that moving the 9th grades would save us $478,000 a year at some point. What I don't understand is, we don't need how to reconcile the first point with the third point, irrespective of the second point. So if the first point is, we have enough space to host all of our 9th graders as our building is now, and now we have to change it, the cost of changing it is going to offset the $470,000?
If we have to bring in 420 to 440 students, right? Given our current configuration, we can't do that. It would like just squeeze them in here because over the years our utilization has changed, and I spoke to how special ed has grown and there's not as many flex spaces. Those classrooms are solely used for special ed. Now in the past they could have been used for a math class or a social studies class, but now they're solely used for special ed. So those classrooms are off. So that's 10 classrooms, right? And we also have an E&L population. We have response to intervention. So those are 2 classrooms that are now being dedicated. We have an alternative ed classroom. So I'm up to 13, right? And now I have a safety and security entrance. 3.5 classrooms were used. So we need to find a way to recoup those 17 classes. By the way, that's what it would take to bring the 9th graders back in. So if you do the math with the utilization, you know, so there'll be classrooms that aren't being used that we'll be able to use, and then there's the 17 classrooms that we brought offline over the past several years that need to be brought back. And that's what you're seeing in phase 2. I don't know if I did that. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure that the cost of, I'm not sure how the math of the cost of the renovations offsets the cost of the $470,000 we're going to save. Because, right, would you have to renovate both buildings? Bring them both up? If we left it.
Minerva Deland?
Yeah.
So if we left Minerva Deland and we stayed exactly where we are, there's $8 million worth of building condition survey work that needs to occur. And if, okay, well, I didn't say it in fairness to you. Yeah. Yeah, that's a, right, yeah. Yes?
What type of work though are you going to have to do over the next 5 years in urban? Just going to sit the way it is, or is there plans to update, correct things?
This is Kevin Rademacher. He's with LaBelle. He can speak to the exact pieces of what needs to occur.
Sure. Recently, the roofs were replaced on Minerva Deland, so those are in good shape for 30 years plus, hopefully. There's also some items that are on the building condition survey that we would address if a merger did not occur. We look to do windows and storefront around the building, potentially heating systems and upgrading those. So right now there's nothing completely critical, but there's a lot of data and dollars sitting on that building if you want to maintain that as a school building.
And again, the objective there would be to get somebody to come in, and you're a landlord, and if you get the right partnership, that could be part of, you know, the collaboration, right? So yeah, it's our investment. We need to protect it. So we just need to make sure that we manage it with the right people that come in and offset it. Yes.
So depending on who you bring in and if you share that space with Minerva, how will you ensure the safety of the kids? Depending on who comes into that building. And if you have kids in that building still using the pool and other things, like what's the plan about addressing their safety?
Yeah, I don't have a specific plan, but that would be part of, you know, our expectation. I mean, I know that district offices are, you know, are shared with children. You know, you can create some very specific barriers that delineate, you know, how you separate and still support and maintain a safe building. You know, that's not compromised. Safety has got to be our #1 priority. Yes.
I just want to make sure I'm understanding the timeline for how we think. So you're thinking of current second graders. I have a second grader, 2 third graders, and increasing. So my second grader would potentially be, if the merger goes through, one of the first classes to be in 9th grade at the high school. So then my third graders and then 4th graders, 5th graders, those current students would be the ones living through the impacts with the renovations and everything happening at the high school.
Potentially, and again, timelines can shift. There could be, you know, variables that make this even go out further. If for some reason we could speed it up for some reason, that's always my druthers, that we would be on that side of it. So our third graders would be the ones experiencing it. That's just a general time frame. And I have a third grader who will be going through that, so I get that. and I just can't give you, it's going to be this class, but it's going to be around that area. So you can go home tonight and say to your 7th grader, no worries, right? We're going to, it's going to be okay. It's going to stay exactly the way it is. However, we'll be communicating, making sure that we have all the good questions that are being talked about tonight. Those will be at the forefront of the next phase of this. Yes?
Initially, it sounded like there was capacity in this building to house the 9th grade. But now, as you go into more detail, it sounds like we're going to have to renovate and add on to this building in order to bring the 9th grade in, which then does not sound easily responsible. We should not be letting one brick in this school district if we have excess capacity.
So again, in order for us to bring students to this building, there needs to be space recouped. And I just went through a whole litany of things that we've repurposed for good reasons, from programming perspective, right, to where professional development offices are, to programming. That all needs to be recouped. Oh, yeah, that's part of the conversation. Correct. Correct. That's part of, you're 100% correct. That's part of the conversation. Yes?
Wouldn't it make more sense to, once you guys make the decision to go for it or not, to do the construction here first before bringing the 9th graders in, so then you know you absolutely have the space, so then you're not affecting 9th and 12th graders with them adjusting to being in high school along with all the construction?
So the space is still available, so the square footage is still here. So many of the rooms, if you look around at the tan that's right up against the perimeter of the building, you can see that those can be classroom spaces because they require 30 feet of visual relief, according to SED. So they've been repurposed as workrooms, teacher spaces, things like that. So what we've done here is we've kind of flipped it. So we've pulled those teacher spaces and the workrooms to the internal areas of the building. And now we've been able to gain back those classrooms that were lost over time and built out as resource rooms and things like that. So we've been able to accomplish that task with really the similar square footage. And the addition that you see out there is really taking advantage of a one-time aid from SED to create a STEM lab. So that's the only addition portion. Yes, everything else is a reconstruction space that you see. The blue is really, as Brock spoke about, is the BCS items, Building Condition Survey, which really doesn't affect any of the merger conversation. So that would be a first stage project.
None of that would affect the students that are actually moving around the hallways in here?
Correct. So the construction, if I'm speaking out of turn, is really scheduled for summer construction, so we'd accomplish portions of that. That's why the science classrooms will take about a 3-year term. You'll start to turn over classrooms.
But the cafeteria, again, will be...
The cafeteria that's being planned will be constructed during the summer into the school year as well, so that will be a disruption, right? And you wouldn't do all the science classrooms at once. That's why you would save some, like Kevin was saying, so you can, sort of rotate them in. Yes? Yeah, that's the cost. That's the cost of construction. But at the same time, I know that there's a team that works very hard to try to minimize that. And it's just like your household projects that occur. You try to minimize them. I do know that we do need to manage our spaces differently. We need to do things differently with how we set up our environments, and that does require us to do these pieces. We have mechanical, electrical, responsibilities. I mean, if the boilers don't work, that's going to disrupt the learning environment too. Those need to be replaced, right? And you know, those are the pieces that it's just we're a live organization. That's how you maintain and upkeep your facilities. The roof, somebody was talking about the roof. You know, if we don't manage the roofs, you're going to have lots of leaks and lots of problems, and that would cause disruption. So it's part of protecting your investment. Yes?
Just a comment on that. I work at Victor High School, which I feel like we're constantly doing capital improvement projects. And I work as a teacher in the high school, and we've gone through many, many years in projects, and they do the most they can during the summer, and it does not affect our education of the students. They are able to, and I'm sure that people that you hire, they're going to do the same thing, where they're able to kind of, they're replacing all the lights in our school right now. Every single light in the entire school. And they're not bothering our educational projects. We don't even know they're there. So I'm just saying that I'm sure you're probably going to do the same thing, where you're going to hire people to do the most they can during the summer, and to do the most they can without, I can very honestly say that I teach my math, and I don't even know they're there. So I'm sure you're probably going to do the same thing. And I appreciate the improvements they make, because our power doesn't go up while I'm teaching, and because I do have all these new upgrades. So I do appreciate the fact that you're making these improvements, because I do feel that the building is outdated, and those are the reasons why they're probably having the issues that they do.
Thank you. We're going to go over. Yes, sir?
I'm a high school math teacher out in Gaines. My wife graduated from Fairport, grew up here. Change is always really hard. But I will say this, especially for all the parents that think about cases 9 through 12, for all the parents that think about the transition, if your student is in the high school in 9th grade, they have all those teachers that they get to see each day, and it makes the transition to 10th grade easier. If you really sit back and think about it, they go to a building for 9th grade, and they lose those teachers. At least they can see. I follow all my kids from the time they enter my class in 9th grade till their senior year. Go to graduation. If everyone's in the same building, it's just more relationships and longer relationships. I mean, you really should step back and think about that as this is going forward.
Thank you. There was, yes, sir?
Just one other quick thought. You identified where the enrollment is fairly flat for quite a few years now. I was just curious, have you and the board had any conversation with the village and the town planning boards or organizations as to what's being planned to stimulate growth within the village and the town of Perrington, rather than just see our population continue to decline? And how might that be?
Yeah, partnerships are extremely important. There's been a shift in leadership, which is I'm looking forward to build relationships with our new mayor and our town supervisor. But those were in place, and you know, I've met with them both on different occasions. And how do we just expand on our partnerships? How do we look for ways that we could share services? That's something that's inherently built in what we do.
Okay, well, that didn't answer my question.
Well, I don't like. I don't know how I can stimulate the growth of you know, people coming to Fairport.
No, what I'm asking is, are you in sync with plans that are being discussed or considered by the village and the town to stimulate growth?
No, I'm not part of their zoning and their planning board meetings. No, I do know that, you know, the schools that we have, the facilities that we have are important. They would say that they're important because it helps with those pieces. They would say, based upon conversations that I've had with the town supervisor, the former town supervisor, and the former mayor, that was always something. Take pride in your schools, invest in your schools. So when it comes to real estate investments or making the community look appealing, certainly that's good for everybody. But I'm not part of, you know, planning efforts. You know, when the next housing tract or residential tract is coming in.
Which therefore might impact population.
The way I understand it, there's not a lot of land and opportunity to do that in Perrington. Just just, it's sort of like we've reached our max there. There's pockets that are coming, but nothing of significant. Senior housing, too. Yes?
Sorry, one
No, you're fine.
So it sounds like if you go ahead and, you know, get everybody from ninth grade over to the high school, save $420,000 potentially. But then there's, so some of these projects have to be done to be brought up to code, but then there was discussion of some other projects that have to happen in order for these kids to come over. So what is the projected cost of those, you know, that have to be done just simply to bring the ninth graders over? Is it more than $420,000?
For some reason, what's that? I'm just trying to get to this. This is not allowing me to go forward. Oh, backwards, is that what? There it is. Yep.
So good evening, I'm Mark Esposito with Campus Construction Management Group. To answer your question, so master planning is always a difficult process in school buildings. Looking at the overall scope of work, I mean, we're touching over 100,000 square feet in the high school throughout this process. So what we've tried to do is put it together in 2 phases, equally distribute financially and impactful of the building, to also allow for the future merger conversation to also continue to take place in program-wise so it can be developed. So showing here the blue color in the scope of work going down in that column, or sorry, yeah, has associated with the phase 1, which would have been associated with the 2019 capital project vote. And then we also have in the tan or yellow color a phase 2, which would be associated with the 2022 vote. In this first row is the work associated with the Fairport High School that would have to be taken place for infrastructure-wise, is really what phase 1 takes care of, with the cafeteria, the science rooms, some of the team room work, the turf field replacement that goes into that, a lot of the BCS and the HVAC controls that have to be changed out in this building. And then in the phase 2 really is getting with the building of the classrooms, the additional rooms, utilizing the space in the facility, like Brett was talking about and Kevin hit on, and really focusing on the rest of the BCS items. We have to expand the bus loop for this facility, put down a fire access road all the way around the building. But also, because there's also other buildings in the district, be looking at doing work at every other one of the school buildings except for Minerva DeLand in this process. And looking at the BCS reports, the secure entrances is really something that needs to get focused on at every one of those buildings. So we've put in some dollars associated with that. Right now these are very round figures based on square footages and things that come from the BCS, the Building Condition Survey. So we've been looking at these as to up to numbers at this point. Once the district and the Board of Education make a decision on how a merge would go if it was going to happen, we just start looking at each of the areas of scope, really trying to hone those down. I think Brett's talked that being a May, June, and July real conversation for that design purpose of this. But again, it's really all trying to figure out if this process of a merge would happen moving forward. So this was a way to look at how to take the master plan and distribute it over a 5 to 6 year period for doing the votes and performing the construction work to make that happen.
Mr. Dunn.
If the voters say yes on Plan A, the first part, and then they come back and say no on the second, where does that put us?
That speaks volumes right there. I mean, and I think that's why if you take a look at this plan, 2019, right, you know, we talked about things that need to occur, right? This stuff needs to occur no matter what happens. So between 2019 and 2022, we're going to continue to get a pulse and continue to understand the landscape of what's happening in Fairport. You know, world politics could impact it. So in 2022, when we engage on this process, we'll get a heartbeat of where we're, you know, a pulse on where we are and go forward accordingly. And yeah, I mean, there's a buffer there that could shift the trajectory of where this project goes. But it's still not going to stop the fact that we need these things to occur, right? And if they say no to this, you know, what are the other things that we need to do to keep giving our students quality experiences, 21st century learning opportunities? Yes?
I've been seeing an impact to the traffic, so I drop off every morning. And I'm luckily on the east side, so
have like 30 cars to wait for instead of all the way down to Boston.
Except if you're coming from Whitney. Now there's one road, right?
Right.
That's not good. We'll talk about it later. Yeah.
So I wonder what the traffic impact would be for 33% more families dropping off. I know buses are great, but.
Yeah. And that's why I think we were talking about there needs to be site work done to Fairport High School to take on, additional cars that will be coming over for staffing, but also loop and fire safety. That all needs to be managed.
And part of the project process is a seeker review. So this traffic study would be something that would be part of that State Environmental Review Act that would take place before a capital project, and that's something the board would have to pass a resolution on to get a capital project up to vote. So that's a process that will take place in planning of the project.
Mr. Clark would say over here, and rightfully so, with our declining enrollment, we have less seniors driving to school. So that's taking them out of the mix, which is very, that's a true fact. So. Yes, Mr. Dunn.
Anybody bring any pothole repair stuff in there?
Got no coal patch on me, sorry.
I really appreciated the flow of this conversation rather than having me go through my entire PowerPoint. I think we hit on most of the events or most of the main topics. As always, there's cards up here. If you want to leave us a note, if you want to share your thoughts, you can always put your thoughts down on paper. There's another community meeting on April 3rd, and it's going to be at Minerva DeLand. So same time, 7 p.m. But we'll be putting that information out there again if you want to have another shot at this. But please, if you need a card, they're up here. We're very interested to hear your comments.
Next slide.
And our presentation is online, right? Brilliant. And we'll make sure that we'll tweet that out and get that to everybody.
Next slide schedule.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. So I think they're ready to go. I'm reading the crowd here. So I think here, this is where we are right here, right? We're in our community forums. We're trying to share the information. We learned a lot from you. I'm glad to hear, the passions around social emotional impacts because, that's where we live as well. The board will be in a position to make a decision by the end of April, and then the board will determine the scope of the project May, June, July, and August, and then we'll continue to communicate how that looks from a capital project perspective, and you'll be learning more about that as we move along. So
Brett, any budget vote, or not budget vote, but vote on this project
would be
next
if
in 2020?
The board needs to first understand what's happening here and collecting data and information, and a potential capital project vote will be coming in December of 2019.
Okay, so a special vote.
A special vote December of 2019. This has nothing to do with the May budget vote. This is just our attempt to reach out to you. Thank you. Have a great evening.